Most of my relatives and friends work in either construction or traffic control. They live in the Fairfield LGA and they've been forced to either take annual leave or they've got no work. And $750 from the government just isn't going to cut it. We don't have the luxury of working from home. My uncle, for instance, has a wife and kids to look after and a mortgage to pay. On top of that, there is so much police right now in Fairfield, and there are choppers in the air every couple of hours. It feels like we're being treated like criminals. We are so frustrated, we are angry, and we are so depressed. When is the government going to end this lockdown, get the police out, and now the army out, and allow us to get back to work?
It's a very frustrated and angry Ron out there. And Mohammed, Ahmad, I'll start with you. Does that reflect any of the feeling you're picking up where you are?
The answer is yes. That question is complicated. I'm going to have to answer it from two ends. So firstly, we have to talk about it from people's individual responsibilities during a crisis. The other day, a gentleman that I read about tested positive for COVID, but still thought it was a good idea to go out and buy a pair of dumbbells. Because, you know, during a global pandemic, the most important thing in the world is the size of your biceps. We have to recognize that this is an incredibly serious situation. And the person that I've been thinking a lot about lately is Dr. Jamal Rifi, who is a doctor in Belmore. And, you know, he was present when my grandmother passed away in 1997. He was there for her last breaths. And since then, he's been looking after my mum and dad into their senior years. He's been looking after me and my 5 siblings, and he's looking after our kids. I'm not asking the people in Western Sydney or anywhere else in the country to listen to our politicians. I actually understand that they've let us down, that they've confused us. In many ways, they've betrayed us. But I am asking you to listen to the doctors in your neighbourhoods who have been looking after our families for generations.
Mohammed, I'll leave it there for one second. I just want to quickly hear from the panel, but it's interesting to hear that slightly different take, I guess, on the situation that Ron and others and you find yourselves in. Chris Bowen, your response to Ron?
Yeah, thanks, Virginia. I certainly understand what is motivating Ron's comments, but Mohammed is right. We do need to follow the medical advice. The medical advice is that lockdowns work. But certainly I think that in Fairfield's case, it has been tough, and I think a lot of people have misunderstood throughout wider Sydney what Fairfield has been dealing with. A lot of well-meaning journalists asked me at the beginning of this, why are the people of Fairfield still moving about? You know, why aren't they getting the message? It's not about getting the message. We have a very industrialised workforce, a heavily construction and transport-focused workforce. People can't work from home. And it has not been just good enough to say work from home. A lot of people, the vast majority of people in my community, cannot work from home. I'm very glad that the economic support was lifted yesterday. I'd still like to see a modified JobKeeper back because that is the simplest way of getting people off the Centrelink queues. I was at the Fairfield Centrelink office yesterday. The queues have not reduced since the lockdown began because the situation is very complicated. And the frustration for construction workers, I understand, of course, we'll support and implement all the health orders, but, you know, construction workers can't go to work in Fairfield. We probably have the healthiest construction workers in Australia being tested every 3 days, and it's pretty frustrating that they can't go to work when other people in supermarkets, etc., can. So there needs to be a lot more clarity. And as for the announcement of the military tonight, well, local members haven't been consulted or informed as to what role they'll be playing, and if the military is going to play a role, I would suggest that community leaders and MPs need to be brought on deck pretty quickly to explain what role the military will be playing, because Ron is right. I mean, there's a Polair helicopter over the top of my house 4 times a day. I understand what stress that provides, and military on the street, if not very sensitively and carefully handled, could add to that tension.
Let's go to Clover more, because I guess, Clover, it's your job to tell Ron that, as Chris Bowen indicated, because he's in one of those 8 lockdown local government areas, even though construction is returning, he can't go to work.
No, and it's, I think what he described is the very grim scene, and people are really anxious, and the $750 isn't going to do it. And really, you know, what we need is everyone to get vaccinated so that the lockdown can be lifted. And I mean, that's just the answer to all of this. And I think people feel really failed by government, by the federal government, for not getting that vaccine out to people and not communicating to them that it was absolutely essential that people get vaccinated. I mean, to think that, you know, the people who are now dying are unvaccinated, and to think 25% of people over 70 are not vaccinated just means there has been totally inadequate communication. And I think that this is what the people of Fairfield must be feeling. They're being told now to stay at home, and they have jobs that clearly aren't desk jobs, and they're totally angry and frustrated, and yet, you know, the vaccination message just simply hasn't got out there, and that's because the vaccination hasn't been here. You know, there's been a slight increase over the last week, but only 18% of people are vaccinated now, and we need to get to 80% before we can go back to normal. So what are we going to say to the person who called in? You're going to have an awful lot of long time to wait if we're going to have to get to 80%. So I think the situation is grim. There's no other way to describe it. And really, I hope the federal government, I hope the Prime Minister's listening, because he's really got to get his act together and get that vaccination to us. And the thing I'd ask him to do is get on the phone to President Biden. You know, we're the willing ally. We go to war when the US wants us to go to war. You know, we're you know, in what was just described in Fairfield as a type of war zone, and that's how many people feel. We need the vaccine.
Let me go to Senator Bragg, who's representing the government tonight, and there's a fair bit in that for you, Senator.
Well, I mean, Ron, the first duty of government is to look after its citizens, and when a government closes down a business, it needs to compensate that business. Now, if you're a sole trader, if you're a sparky or an electrician, or you're a builder, I mean, there are payments there. I accept that the $1,000 a week for a sole trader is only going to be a temporary stopgap. I mean, I think there is more that we will have to do once we get through this pandemic to help construction and to help traders get back on their feet. And look, it's all well and good for people who have desk jobs to say, look, they can work from home. I mean, it's easy to walk into your kitchen table and put your computer down, but I mean, many people like you, Ron, can't actually work from home. So I think we have a very heavy duty that we owe to you. But it is most important now, as Clover says, that we get on board with the vaccination. 200,000 in the last day, which is a record, including 80,000 in New South Wales. So whilst New South Wales is currently dealing with a very serious outbreak, on this track, we're going to be the first out and the first to freedom.
Deborah Cheetham?
Well, I agree with much that has been said, and I just want to say to Ron, we really feel your pain. We've been through that here in Melbourne. Lockdown is a necessary but a blunt tool, and it has a long tail. The industry I'm in, for instance, the arts industry, lockdown has a very long tail for us, and many of my colleagues were not eligible for payments during that very long period last year and in the ensuing lockdowns this year. It is, the only way out is vaccination, and we need the federal government to step up and do the one job that has been given in this crisis, and that is to roll out the vaccination to Australian citizens.